So I'm looking at this complaint filed by Brian Flores. It's actually very comical because this is what happens. This is what happens when you have institutions that feel forced to create rules and standards and proclamations about diversity and inclusion. They create their own downfall. It's used against them. It is so used against them. It's actually very funny. I was looking through this complaint. Um, Basically, there's a rule where you have to give interviews to minorities. It's called Rooney Rule that the NFL adopted to combat the utter lack of black coaches. They said it's like 1 in 24, and the NFL is 70% black. Our country is like 13% black. So, uh, I don't know. 1 in 24 is more than 13%, but actually, is it? I'm stupid, but it doesn't matter. We don't need to be focusing on that. But it's interesting. They create their own rule, and what ended up happening is a coach texted him, "Congratulations, you got the job," before the interview happened. And then he's like, "Wait, I didn't even have the interview yet, so what do you mean?" And then the coach texted him, "Oh, sorry, no, it was actually someone else. You actually didn't get it." And this is all before the interview. So, of course, the interview was basically a sham. And that's the basis for this lawsuit. In addition to just general SJW-esque accusations. And they did this to themselves. This is what these institutions do when they're infected like this. With critical race theory and bureaucrats. And the first line of this is, I mean, as this class action complaint is filed on the first day of Black History Month, we honor the brave leaders that fought so hard to help break down racial barriers of injustice. MLK, Harriet Tubman. This judge will look like a racist if they grant a motion for summary disposition or something. This is the problem. It's like, I think the judicial system is like really one of the last. Once that goes, we're done. Like the judicial system at least is a little bit better because judges usually just. I view them as a little less biased, but we've seen some things recently that point otherwise. All I can say is that they're weaponizing the NFL's own language against them, and the NFL's attempts to cater to the SJW mob. They quote from Jonathan Bean, the NFL's senior vice president and chief diversity and inclusion officer. So essentially, they're a non-meritocracy, dark wing of the organization. Get rid of all of these offices and things will be better. Look, they're using it to create more liability. Their liability is completely increased here because that officer stated, "Any criticism we get for lack of representation at the GM and head of coach positions, we deserve." Thank you, beta male. We see that we're not where we want to be. We have to do much better. We're focusing on all roles at the league. And if you look at it right now, we're grossly unrepresented. In comparison to what? The demographics of the country? Of course not. And I don't even want to get into percentages of representation because the best we can do is meritocracy. That's the best we can do. They get into some really tricky stuff here. Put simply, the NFL took the position that white people simply have a better baseline for cognitive function than black people. This is the very definition of racism. The assumption that someone is not as smart as another person because of the color of his or her skin. Yeah, you can't respond to that. There are no institutions that exist today where you can respond to that statement with. You just have to take it. You just have to take it. Asians are smarter than whites. Then the next 2 lines down, these are literal admissions of liability and fault on the part of the NFL and its owners. Great job, idiots. Just intentional self-destruction. And of course these officers, the diversity officers, it's all emotional and they'll say whatever. Like, this is classic emotional virtue signaling. You'll undermine your own position. It's apologizing because you feel like it's the right thing to do, pacify the mob, and then they use it against you. It's just like one of the universal issues with appeasing your enemies, basically. So it goes on. The issue is there's absolutely no proof of racism other than a disparate outcome. There's nothing that's actually... The thing is that it's terrible what happened to the guy. Was he going into a sham interview? Yes, he was. Because they instituted a self-inflicted rule where they had to interview minorities. They're screwing themselves over by placing racialized standards on things, trying to help maybe, but completely for the purposes of virtue signaling. And it puts them in a position where this type of thing can happen, and they deserve it. They deserve the results. I don't think they necessarily deserve to be held civilly liable, because it's a rule that they imposed on themselves. It's not the law. As far as I know, I don't think it's a legal requirement for them to interview minorities. I think this Rooney Rule is self-imposed. But it can serve as evidence of discrimination, potentially. I mean, they never should have adopted the rule. Then they wouldn't have this problem. And then, of course, you just get into the racial disparity arguments that this lawsuit is just foundationally premised on. Yeah, he screwed up so bad. This, this text exchange between Bill Belichick and the plaintiff, Mr. Flores, This whole thing could have been avoided, even in the midst of it. He says, "Sounds like you've landed. Congrats." Implying that Flores got the job. Flores responds, "Did you hear something I didn't?" "Giants?" Implying like, you got it, man. Flores says, "I interview on Thursday. I think I have a shot at it." Bill says, "Got it. I hear from Buffalo and New York City that you are their guy. Hope it works out if you want it to." Okay, then later he says, "Sorry, I fucked this up." Yeah, he did. And he never should have sent this text. This text is a problem. I double checked and misread the text. I think they are naming Du Bois, I guess the guy who got it instead of him. I'm sorry about that. You gotta take your emotion out of it and be litigation minded when you're deep pockets like this. This is a somewhat of an admission. There's some text or document that I'm sure will be discoverable that states that the other person got it prior to Flores's interview sham. And that's terrible. I mean, I feel bad for Flores. It's a terrible look, and that's what these offices do. They create these situations where racial animosity can flourish. Now, there is one aspect of the request for relief that I don't mind. Right here, this one's fine with me. I mean, require NFL teams to consider side-by-side comparisons of objective criteria, such as past performance, experience, and objective qualifications. That's not gonna result in pure equity. That's going to result in meritocracy. So, on one hand, I like that. Unfortunately, on the other hand, you have this one that states, require NFL teams to reduce to writing the rationale for hiring and termination decisions, including a full explanation of the basis for any subjective influences. See, the problem is it's just they're expanding the bureaucracy of these institutions in a way that really makes it difficult to do your job. And a court order for a major institution like this to do this is very onerous. I don't really support it. I support the NFL voluntarily having an objective way to measure these things and taking that into account. That's not a bad idea. But for it to be court ordered, I don't think that the court will do that. And these are just litigation traps a lot of the times. Okay, you have these objective measures. You said this. You said this. You said this. These are documents for litigation. And it's hard for me to think of how these are a positive thing. They make people very worried, sensitive, censored. And I don't think that that's a positive imposition on companies, really, and the employees at them. These standards would result in real problems for people in these positions because they're exposing themselves and the company to liability.